Scott is the Associate Professor of English Literature at Tyndale University. And as I mentioned, his research traces the destructive anthropological heresies of Romanticism and their contribution to the atheistic reframing of education. Dr. Masson has been a long-standing advocate for classical Christian education and has been one of its main drivers in the revival movement in Canada and in Ontario over the past decade or more, as one of the founders of Westminster Classical Christian Academy in Toronto. Scott is currently working with the Discovery Institute as well as Christian Halsey International in the work that they are doing to transform Christian education. And his work, his research currently is working towards a monograph titled C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, Defenders of Freedom and Dignity. Scott lives in Toronto with his wife Krista and their 2 children, and we are looking forward to hearing from her. If you would join me in welcoming Scott Masson.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan, for the very kind words of introduction. When you're a professor, you actually have trouble imagining the day when your students lead institutions and give you public tribute. It's hard to express my gratitude to God for that. I called my talk here the Anduril moment. And I did so recognizing that this is about God and government, and so it seems slightly, perhaps off topic, but I think and I hope that you will find that it is in fact directly on topic here. So let me begin with the connection point here. And for those of you who aren't Tolkien fans, Anduril is the name of the sword that is reforged from a broken sword, the sword Narsil, that had cut off the finger of Sauron at one point. And it is the sword that Aragorn the king will pick up and wield. It's one of the pivotal moments, the most dense, symbolic moments of the Lord of the Rings, because it does all sorts of things in a literary sense. It reveals the identity of the king. It reveals at the same time his destiny. It reveals his kingship, and it reveals and symbolizes restoration. So it's a sign of his calling and his character. It's the reforging of a broken past, which had been broken in large part due to his ancestor by blood. It's a commitment to an eschatological struggle of good and evil, and it's a return to rightful order. All of these things are represented by this, what I call the Anduril moment. And I am using it to structure my talk because I'm in agreement with Oliver O'Donovan that Western civilization finds itself the heir of political institutions and traditions which it values without any clear idea why, or to what extent it values them. And so my intent here is to build on G.K. Chesterton's very important point about proportionality in education, seeing things in their right relation, seeing important things as important and lesser things as of lesser importance. This is part of the evaluation process that every teacher needs to present, even when structuring a talk. And so Chesterton writes, the only real project of all education is to teach people the proportion of things. So they see things as large and small and present them in such terms. Now, we opened our whole presentation last night with Pastor Wilson pointing out the evasiveness of the term gospel-centered and the truncation that often occurs under that very term. And he suggested a very significant part of the problem is our conception of ourselves. And he said that it was very atomistic. We see ourselves as little, discrete, autonomous things, rather than as molecules, having a complexity, having a structure, having a relation to other things. That's our sense of selves. I'm going to talk about that here, actually. That's my purpose here today. And my address is going to build on both of those points. that gospel-centered is much larger than the cognitive aspect of our heads, and you'll see how the talk fits with that. But also that our sense of who we are as people needs a relational sense and a broader relational sense. And all that comes from our understanding of who Christ was. I also want to speak of Michael Wagner's observation that the charter relates to the government to the people. And that's significant as well. These things are significant. On the personal scale, the government is problematic because of the charter. The relations between the provinces and the federal government, that's not a problem. But towards the people it is. And the reason it is towards the people is because of the anthropological problems that I'm going to identify here. Now, I was originally approached to discuss cultural Marxism with you. I'd like to honor my host by touching on that point just for a minute, because I do think it's important. And actually, 11 years ago, actually almost 11 years to the day, I gave an address at a conference on social justice and delivered a talk on cultural Marxism. And the reason I know that is because my son had just been born, and my wife was in the hospital at the time. Neither of them heard the talk, obviously. It's on YouTube, on my channel, which was helpfully flagged up. It's still there. And I traced in that talk the development of cultural Marxism over the course of the whole 20th century. And I mentioned that so much of our contemporary discourse, both in terminology and also its sense of logic and purpose and meaning, came directly out of the cultural Marxist playbook. So I talked about the origins of social justice. I talked about the long march through the institutions. That was part of the cultural Marxist project, and it had reached its completion point by this point. The institutions had been captured. I talked about repressive tolerance. So the appeal of tolerance that didn't allow any opposition, coming from Marxism, cultural Marxism. I talked about the inversion of values and the transvaluation of all values. So what had been considered to be just was now unjust, and vice versa. So good was evil and evil good. I talked about identity group politics and the polarities of discourse in all Canadian discussions between an oppressed group of people and the oppressors. And I said that this would be updated in keeping with the advances of anti-humanist theories. And I listed some of them. So post-colonialism, feminism, post-humanism, queer theory. These would all identify a different form of oppressor. And the form of that oppressor would vary, but in many ways, actually the group that was oppressed would vary, but the oppressor would be pretty much centered around power, because it explained all dynamics in terms of power. I don't know if you can see this slide very clearly or not. This is a wheel of privilege. And intersectionality is the term that's used. Intersectionality talks about the various aspects of your group identity. And you'll notice that if you talked about everyone in the middle, if you could see it, you probably can't because it's so small. I am the oppressor. I am the quintessential oppressor, pretty much. Because all of the ones that are innermost there give me, according to the cultural Marxist identification, make me an oppressor, not because of what I say or because of what I do, but simply because of who I am. And this is the problem with identity group politics, is that it clearly identifies the oppressor. And it makes it so that oppression is part of their identity. And this is what's so noxious about the ideology, is actually it doesn't actually care about ideas. It cares about victimizing. And the victimizing is going to be visited upon those who are identified as victimizers. So there is a very strong and negative angle to this. And we've seen that play out over the past 11 years. So that now there's been a backlash against that as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Despite my warning, Justin Trudeau was elected a year later. Surprisingly, nobody listened. Didn't you hear my talk? It's on YouTube, didn't you know? But Trudeau was elected on a post-nationalist, progressive, post-humanist, and feminist social policy, advocating, among other things, abortion rights. He introduced a bill that made conversion therapies illegal, So gender fluidity was a one-way street. Once you'd made the transition, there was no going back. So it's a fluid downhill. It legalized cannabis for recreational use. It increased immigration on a scale at unprecedented, increased foreign aid in ways that made it look like it was a wartime effort. And it opened pot shops everywhere overnight, and I suspect they're money laundering places. Because even though Toronto smells of pot, there's not that much pot being smoked, truly. And as befitting a regime following that sort of Marxist playbook, it became also increasingly censorious. And we've heard a bit about that under COVID. Following policies that we first observed in China, draconian policies in lockstep throughout the West at the same time, all over in what is clearly a coordinated fashion. I mean, there's no other explanation for it. And all to stop a respiratory illness whose profile suggested that it was dangerous for the very elderly and the infirm, but pretty much everyone else was. You'd be at greater risk if you were experiencing the common flu virus. And we did all sorts of absurd things, like 6-foot social distancing thing. I still see those signs of that. Like, trust the science, but the science of 6-foot zones, why 6, why not 3? Internationally, it was 3 feet, by the way. In Canada, it's 6. I guess we have more space. I guess we have more robust COVID viruses. You tell me, I don't understand the logic here. We had bubble zones that excluded your relatives. All sorts of social policies, breaking up natural bonds and the relationships of the molecules so that we became atoms. Right? All through a militarized propaganda assault that abrogated the sole ethical plank of the post-World War II consensus, which is about bodily autonomy and informed consent. We were neither informed nor did we consent. That didn't matter. And the hospitals went along with it. That was one of the things that was most worrying and troubling. And noteworthy during COVID was that the left's abortion slogan, "My body, my choice," was just dropped. It went down the memory hole. It was gone. My body, my choice didn't matter anymore. And if we're in any doubt that the whole COVID debacle was a military-grade psyop led by cultural Marxists, magnifying the state, in conjunction with the corporate world, I will say, both exploded at the time. Government grew, and so did the big corporate tech world. Their profit margins went through the roof. We will notice, despite that, that protests were allowed. BLM protests. So in May 2020, and they became not only part of corporate policies, they became a feature of professional sports, part of the ritual undertaken, right? Taking the knee and all that. That happened in May 2020, right in the heart of the pandemic. These protests were allowed to happen, and the protests that ensued and so forth. And yet, in 2022, the peaceful protests of the Freedom Convoy was greeted with the most draconian lockdowns and the abrogation of every charter right and freedom by imposing the Emergencies Act. Just in following his father's playbook, wanting to live up to his reputation, I guess. If, for those of you who don't know, Pierre had brought in the, not the Emergencies Act, what was it called? The War Measures Act. But that was against a terrorist organization, the FLQ. Even then, I think it was outrageous. But still. Now, this shouldn't have surprised us because the cultural Marxists always pay lip service to the identity group policies of intersectionality, as you see behind you, or in front of you. And they present themselves as defenders of minority rights, of the oppressed, and they're on their side. But they always ignore, because they don't actually even recognize the existence of the ultimate minority, namely the individual. The individual human person has no recognition in the cultural Marxist scheme. You are the accumulation of your identity group politics profiles, but you are never a person. You are never an individual. The individual is not something that you will find in Marxist thought. You will find groups, but not individuals. This is an assault on human nature. This is what I'm going to talk about today. I think it's so obvious and in our faces that we don't see what is quite apparent. And so we have a Goliath state that will blithely crush its David while gaslighting David as the aggressor and casting itself as the defender. This Turkish proverb comes to mind. We keep voting them in. The forest was shrinking, but the trees kept voting for the axe because as its handle was made of wood and they thought it was one of them. Seemed rather apropos. But at this point, I'm going to shift away from cultural Marxism because I want to get to something more fundamental here, I think more important, much bigger and more insidious than cultural Marxism. Because as I said, the problem with cultural Marxism is the very premise of group identity characteristics pushes people who are white and male and Christian and whatever all the other rich, stable, able-bodied, there's a whole list of characteristics there. They push us into identifying ourselves in those terms, and we fight back as that group which is besieged by the cultural Marxists. And that then gives rise to individuals like Nick Fuentes and Joel Webbin and so forth. And that creates its own problematic dynamic. But at that point, we are acting in accordance with the puppet show set up by the cultural Marxists, and we're not really getting to the root of the problem, which is a noxious view of human nature. And that's what I'm going to talk about here today. Because it's not only the political left, and allowing ourselves to be divided by the way, is opening ourselves just simply to conquest. And I don't like losing. I'm tired of losing. I don't like losing. And the way you win is that you win the argument first. And the way you win the argument is by understanding things properly and understanding where the fault lines are. And it isn't only the political left that does this. So we're also facing, and I already alluded to this, we're facing corporatism. It's more like totalitarian fascism. You know, ideologies coming out of the World Economic Forum and the C40 cities and the rest of the globalist institutions that was sold really hard by hundreds of thousands of proliferating non-government organizations during COVID and to this day, and funded by the very rich to coerce our behavior and actually also our vote to their desires. People are voting these people back in over and over, though they can see that they're getting poorer and poorer and society gets worse and worse. With each succeeding year, we nonetheless keep following for the play that's in front of us. And Agenda 2030 requires the consolidation of every industry. And it squeezes every last cent of profit out of the product until it loses all meaning. And so I want to talk about this just ever so briefly. The loss of meaning. No one's creating anything meaningful anymore. The music is meaningless. The film industry and the TV shows are largely meaningless. They're terrible, unwatchable drivel. The writing that's being produced in novels, I'm not caring about the pollution that would come from burning it. It's not worth burning. It's worthless. It's pulp. Institutional capture. So institutions that look the same on the surface as they did before, but they've been hollowed out and captured from within until every drop of meaning has been sucked out of them, and that what we're left with is something like a skin suit. And we could include among the institutions that are captured in this way all those who wear the robes, the Levitical professions, I might even say. So the doctors that wear the white robes historically, the lawyers that wear their robes into the courtrooms, the clergy and the academics, those institutions that are there for the care and to ensure the holiness of the people have been captured by cultural Marxism, and it is so. I don't even have to justify this. So woke corporatism is a greater problem than mere cultural Marxism. It is now totalitarian. It's there in the people that make money with us. And I'm not hearing anyone talking about it. So it's not only a matter of the lordship of Christ, although it clearly includes that. The problem is that Christ's very nature as a human being has undergone a definition. This is what I'm going to present to you here. He has undergone a redefinition concurrent not with theologians' discussions, but with the discussion that's taken place of human nature in the academy at large, going back to the 18th century. I'm going to endeavor to show you this today. In the period that we call the Enlightenment, and we live in an antichrist era, as Dostoevsky notes and depicts in his novels. He sees the West as being dominated by the antichrist spirit, and I think he's quite profound. Why is he profound? How is he able to see it? Because he's effectively a medievalist whose country has not been brought forward, hasn't made progress the way Western Europe has. So he sees it effectively as a medieval Christian. From the Orthodox camp, he sees with clarity on this matter. And that is because of the redefinition of human nature. Now, I'm going to pull out something here which I think is of significance from John Calvin. Calvin says that our wisdom, insofar as it ought to be deemed true and solid wisdom, consists almost entirely of two parts: the knowledge of God and of ourselves. But as these are connected together by many ties, it's not easy to determine which of the two proceeds and gives birth to the other. So note the significance of the knowledge of human nature that Calvin himself presents in his theological statements. Very important, much understated amongst theologians, by the way. They don't speak of this very much. And he goes on to write, and this is section 2, when we... that's part 2, sorry. I hate using these. It's evident, he says, that man never attains to a true self-knowledge until he has previously contemplated the face of God and come down after such contemplation to look into himself. For such is our innate pride, we always seem to ourselves just and upright and wise and holy until we are convinced by clear evidence of our injustice, vileness, folly, and impurity. So what Calvin says about the importance of human nature. And let me say a little bit here now about that. And you can see behind me this book by C.S. Lewis, such an important book, The Abolition of Man. Lewis observes in this book the Gnostic character of modern science. By the way, it's a book about education. And I teach it every year at Tyndale University, every year. And it has profound implications for education, but also for our understanding of human nature. Our use of technology on human nature and the political implications of the use of technology on human nature. It needs to be read more. If you haven't read it, or you hadn't read it recently, read it again. I have lectures on my YouTube channel. Did somebody mention that? There's some there. Anyway. But what I'm contending here in brief, and I will be producing a book on it, I'm going to call it There and Back Again, because it sounds like, yeah, there you go. Thank you. Is the full significance of human nature that the ecumenical creeds of the church articulated in the first 5 centuries of the church. Because they're dealing with who is Christ, and they're going to emphasize 2 things. They're going to talk about his triune nature, so the Trinity, the 3 persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, as distinct persons of one essence, co-equal and co-eternal, articulated in the Nicene Creed. So we're going to talk about his personhood. God in his nature is personal, and we, by virtue of the fact that we're made in the image of likeness and likeness of God, are ipso facto persons. It's an implication of it. It says that right in Genesis 1:27, by the way. But it doesn't explain exactly what is meant by that, so it's very interesting. Also that Christ has 2 natures, a divine nature and a human nature. He's fully God, possessing all the attributes of divinity, and human, experiencing human life and suffering because he truly was a man. He was born in a manger. He lived a human life, a perfect human life. He died a human death. He was raised bodily. He ascended bodily. The bodily resurrection is an important doctrine. And this was rooted in the Council of Chalcedon, which states that he's one person in 2 natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation. These are very important doctrines that get too little attention in discussions of politics even. Because what this does is it speaks to what Stephen talked about namely the claim of the emperor to be God in our midst. There's only one God-man, and that's the God-man Jesus Christ. But you can see it in Pharaoh, you can see it in ancient Near Eastern rulers. They claim to have the image and likeness of God and nobody else. It's just them. They're the representative man here. So we can see the hypostatic union, the incarnation, salvation, all these. Agreed by Christians, by the way, whether they're Protestant, Orthodox, or Roman Catholic. They'll all agree on these ecumenical councils. So where does the problem arise from that? It arises from our Western understanding of human nature. And that emerges in the 18th century, in the Enlightenment. I'm going to start here by a little bit of art history, very, very brief. This is a picture called Las Meninas by Velázquez. Las Meninas are the maids of the little princess. You can see, as characteristic of Renaissance art, that the portrait is front and center. The object that we're supposed to look at is front and center, light on her. It's in the foreground. We can see her face. We can see everyone looking at her. Her face is important in this. Note that she's looking, I don't know if you can see it because of the size of the image, but she's looking at the artist. Actually, you know who she's looking at? She's looking at her parents. You can't see her parents except in the mirror that's in the background there. They're probably standing behind the artist and making sure that, and making the girl laugh, keeping her attentive because he's got to paint her. She has to stand there for hours. And he's included even them in the portrait, in the mirror in the background there. What we see here is relationality, an emphasis on the human being. It's front and center. Humanity is important in the Renaissance. There are all sorts of problems with the Renaissance, but the focus on humanity and the dignity of humanity is being asserted. This portrait, on the other hand, is from the early 19th century by a great romantic painter by the name of Caspar David Friedrich. It's called The Wanderer in a Sea of Fog. I want to compare the previous portrait with this portrait. And I'm just going to make a few observations. And the observations are telling for the view of human nature that is being articulated in the painting. It's implicit. And I'm going to make it explicit. And I think I'm going to want to make you recognize that this view of human nature, which we see in Friedrich's painting, is our view of human nature. And I don't mean our as in you will necessarily hope, but our culture's view of human nature. And I think we imbibe it without questioning it. So for instance, note first of all that we see the back and not the face of the object in the front. We see the back of him, and he's in shadow as well. He's in darkness. We see nothing of him. We see his back. It's also unclear what his identity is. Is it a male? Is it a female? It's probably a male, but we don't know because we don't see his face. He's wearing a long coat, so who knows? His hair is a little bit longer. Doesn't matter. That aspect of his identity is not important. What's important about this character isn't even the character himself. It's the fact that his focus is on the background, which is lit up. And the foreground is cast in shadow, in darkness, as opposed to this. And so his focus is into the environment, not on the foreground, on humanity itself, but into what he's looking into. And what he's looking into is the misty, murky distance, the fog that he's looking into. And that is a sublime landscape. Now, the sublime as a literary category, as an aesthetic category in the 18th century, has enormous significance, which I think most people are oblivious to now. But it is a vista in which we sense its power and our weakness. I'll give you another example of a sublime landscape. Look out on Lake Ontario. Look into the distance. What you see is nothing. You see limitlessness, because it's big enough to not be able to see the other side in most parts. You have a sense of the grandeur of the scene and your smallness by comparison. You sense its power and your powerlessness. It's particularly there in this, on the top of a mountain. I mean, if a wind gust comes up strong enough, it's going to blow you over and you're going to die. You have a sense of that, your mortality in all this. And what we see is enveloped in obscurity. So what we see, actually, we cannot see particularly well. And it evokes a sense of grandeur and immensity and greatness nonetheless. And so what we see is actually more of a feeling than a visible object. And this is what's important in this painting, actually, is the feelings of the individual whose face we can't see. His feelings matter to us, and you will see that painting after this, it goes into the Impressionists and so forth. Painters will do just like they will in music. They will seek to capture the feelings of the artist rather than reflect an orderly sense of musical notation and so forth, and purposiveness. Art starts to transform come the Romantic period, and this is a Romantic painting. And these feelings of grandeur and immensity and the power of nature animate both the Enlightenment in their deism, because they see God in nature, by the way. Like when you look at a vast mountainscape and look into the misty distance, you have a sense of awe. And they attribute that to the presence of God. That's the deists. But the Romantics don't conclude that. They conclude that the God that they perceive in the obscurity is actually an expression of themselves, because it expresses their feelings about it. They are the gods that they perceive in the grandeur of them. Like, how do I perceive that it's grandeur? Because I myself am grand. And that's further represented by the fact that they're on the pinnacle of a mountain. They represent their culture, their zeitgeist. They are at the top. Their culture has climbed to the point, to the pinnacle. What lies below them is in the past. It doesn't matter. It's of insignificance. What they view, and the man at the top of this, the Übermensch, has an identity which expresses itself in, quite frankly, proto-Darwinist terms. And his identity is something that he creates for himself through his self-expression. Now, I say all of those things because all of those things are going to become features of modernity. And when I say modernity now, I mean our contemporary world. When people say that I identify myself as this or that, where do they get this idea? Or the idea that their sex had been assigned for them at birth, but their gender identity is this. Where would they come up? Like, what a convoluted idea, except is it convoluted? If our identity is something that we create through our feelings, and I feel like I'm a whatever, rather than what my body suggests that I am, then that is being imposed on me socially. Society sees things, but it doesn't feel what I feel. It doesn't know what it's like to be me. And I am my feelings. How I feel about myself is my identity. So this is a Romantic expression of it. And furthermore, because we think that identity of our spirit has a divine quality to it, we demand that the state give lip service and homage to that identity. And we can have a billion gods. It's a sort of an inversion. It's a sort of version of Hinduism almost. Except they're not gods, aren't all these. We're all gods. Little godlets walking around. So let me note all that. Let me note another thing here. This arises because of this man, René Descartes. René Descartes, for those of you who study philosophy, had this famous expression, I think, therefore I am. It was through the method of doubt. This is what's not usually explained, is that the method of doubt is what led to the cogito. He said that I have many things about which I have trouble believing now. Many of the things were a whole new understanding of astronomy and so forth. So he thought that the Earth, that the sun revolved around the Earth before, but now it's clear that it doesn't do that, so I can't trust my eyes anymore. I'm thrown into this terrible doubt. How do I achieve certainty? I achieve certainty through the method of doubt. I doubt everything that so I can't doubt that I'm doubting. And if I'm doubting, then I'm thinking. And if I'm thinking, then I am. So the method of doubt becomes the basis of modern identity. The method of doubt. And it opposes the Christian understanding of reality, which is based on the credo. I believe in order that I might understand, as St. Anselm of Canterbury put it. It's a categorically different. It is a shift against credo Christianity right here in the method of doubt already. And it leads to a certain notion of human nature that some have called, describing Descartes' portrait here, they call it his view of human nature like a ghost in a machine. There's a thinking substance, a res cogitans right at the center of who we are. And that thinking substance, that's me. I know that I'm thinking. That's me, the thinking substance. So what is that thinking substance? Is it the mind? Is it the soul? Is it the brain? Modern psychology will give you different answers to this, by the way. And they're all contradictory, by the way, as well. One's a materialist, one has no bodily, it creates the mind-body problem, there's nothing there at all. But they all say that psychology is central to our human identity, as you know. Once this gets instituted, the humanities get moved from being humanities to being what the Germans will call the Geisteswissenschaften, which is the spiritual sciences, or, as it's translated in English, the human sciences, although Geist is not, human's a bad definition of Geist. And those become the social sciences. And the queen of the social sciences is psychology, which is a discipline that doesn't exist before the 19th century. And as I say, you can't even come up with a stable definition of psychology from amongst the psychologists. So how can it be an ology that is a science if they don't even know the very thing that they purport to be professing and presenting as valid? And one of those psychologists can stand up in court, and I can tell you that his view will have more standing with the court than mine will, because he's an expert in human nature. Now, romantic hermeneutics, which arises from this, is mainline in every thought area, not just in biblical studies, in theology. Because Schleiermacher, the great romantic theologian, says that we can know as well or better than the original author. And the reason we can is because of historical distance. And because of the grand march of time and progress, we know better than what the Apostle Paul wrote. How do we know? Because of historical distance. And because we stand on the pinnacle of the mountain, after all. That's why we know better. We didn't live in the benighted past. We lived in the enlightened present. The result of this actually is well known. And it's that not only did it become mainline Protestantism, it also, and feelings and self-expression of autonomous identity becomes the focus of writing. It's all writing about ourselves, a song of myself, effectively. And it's every pop, musical, cultural moment is expressed in these terms. It also becomes identified with a figure that, not once I mention it, you will recognize it immediately, is the hero in every fictional work from the 19th century onward. Who is that? He is an orphan. No relation to anybody else. Think of the orphans in literature alone. Think of Dickens' heroes. Think of Anne of Green Gables. Think of Huck Finn. Think of all of the Marvel superheroes. Captain America? No. Superman, Batman. I mean, you name them all. They're all orphans. All of them. Harry Potter's an orphan. I mean, you can list more than I can, but they're all orphans. Question for you. Why is the hero of every post-romantic account of life and being presented as an orphan, when this is a situation that almost none of us face, and if we did, we would feel very sorry for them, but this is now presented as a heroic way of looking at life. And note that it has the atomistic character that Pastor Wilson mentioned at the outset. We see ourselves as isolated, atomized individuals, and orphans furthermore. What do orphans face? They face the problem that they have no parents to tell them what to do. Now that's a problem, except they see it as an opportunity, because I can create my own identity from within. I can look within myself. And in fact, that's exactly what Harry Potter is told by the wise old Dumbledore. I don't know, Harry, but you need to look within yourself and you will find a way. And if you can't do it, no one will. Well, that's actually Bilbo Baggins. Oops. Because he's leaning on the same idea, though he doesn't promote orphanage per se. But the same idea of looking within yourself to solve the problems. That is promoted culturally. Now, I say that. And the result of this, as I say, is psychology displaces theology of the queen of the sciences, and also theology is thrown out of the university altogether. You can study religious studies, you can't study theology in the university. By the late 19th century, it's gone. What's the reaction of the church? Bible colleges and seminaries, because they want to teach, they see the significance of theology. They do. But the outcome of this is unintended. The great divorce between theology and the humanities. You have seminaries that teach theology but don't understand humanities. And you have in the university humanities that are now called human sciences that know nothing about theology. So it's the great divorce. And then the relations of the two natures of Christ are not held together in a way that can be lived out, practically experienced, understood, related, and acted upon. You see where I'm going with this? I think it's pretty obvious. And ironically, although perhaps not ironically, perhaps it's obvious that it would happen this way, seminaries are now largely filled with counselors, counseling majors. It's the biggest. It's really hard to get pastors now. All churches say this. Where are we going to get the pastors? Nobody wants to come forward. How come? We've been pushing gospel-centered theology forever, and why aren't they coming forward with it? Because they think it's practically insignificant. And I want to help people, so I'm going to become a counselor. So we're facing what I call the Anduril moment. And I mentioned the talk leading up to this, where we were, the panel discussion, that we need to have in mind here Christ's full humanity here, not just his passive obedience on the cross, where he bore our sins, the substitutionary atonement. Our sins were placed on his shoulders, his righteousness imputed to us, and so forth, the great exchange. That's very important. It's a key Reformation doctrine. It's the hinge on which the faith, it's the article on which the faith stands or falls, right? However, no mention of the active obedience of Christ in that. He lived a perfect human life. Perfect. Have we never thought about the importance of being like Jesus while he lived and not just pointing to his death? There's more significance to Christ than his death, although his death is the most significant feature of his life because the Gospels focus on his death. And he talks about the significance of his death. And it's because of his death that we're no longer in our sins and we can live by faith. But his perfect human life is also a model for us. His active obedience to the law. His willingness to be a good carpenter for 30 years. Very little is said about it in the scriptures, of course. Because of the focus, they don't want the focus to be on that. But he lived a perfect human life. When the Father saw the Son get baptized, he said, "Behold, this is my Son with whom I'm well pleased." He didn't need to be baptized, but he did so to fulfill all righteousness as a man. He was living as a man there. He was representing that. So the reason I call this the Anduril moment is recovering the full humanity of Christ is like discovering the importance of a keel in making boats. This is my final analogy here. A keel is the principal structural member of a boat. It's like the backbone. It runs along from the stern to the bow. Right underneath that wooden thing that holds the ribs come out of it. You can think of like obviously a canoe. But in all boats, it has a keel. And what does the keel do? It's the hydrodynamic component, and it runs underneath the surface. You don't even see it, but it's there, and it keeps the boat from twisting in the wind. Because the wind comes, and if the wind, it has no keel, it just goes over. Even in a canoe, it just goes over. But if you have a sailboat, even more so. You need a keel. You need what's under the water to be robust. You have to understand the human nature of Christ if you want to hold on to the full Christ and hold on to his lordship. You've got to understand this. And what is the function of the keel? Well, it resists the wind that's going to push the boat over. It's going to cause it to collapse and you to fall into the water. Theology could be compared to the sail in the sailboat. It reaches towards the heavens. Humanity, Christ's humanity, is the keel that keeps the boat upright when the winds blow against us culturally. We can even go against the wind with a keel. Do you know that in sailing? Of course you do. You move the sail, but the keel is what allows you to resist the pressure of going over. You can actually go against the cultural winds, right? This is the Anduril moment, where we need to understand the perfect humanity of Christ to allow us to steer against the headwinds of cultural Marxism which are in our day. Thank you very much.